Overseas can be complicated and often requires working with a specialist who has a firm grasp of both domestic and international tax law. At Burden Accountants and Advisors, our experienced team works with clients to help them develop cross-border tax plans that minimize their tax liabilities, ensure compliance, and save them money.
If you're an individual or a business owner, let Burden help protect you, your family, and your business. For more tax chat for Burden Accountants and Advisors, visit burdenllp.com. That's BERDONLLP.com. Burden Accountants and Advisors. We listen, we solve, we do.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with his Bloomberg Business Flash. The major averages lost some steam after this report that showed U.S. manufacturing growth moderated. The Institute for Supply Management Factory Index edging lower amid supply shortages and transport delays coming out of the pandemic. Seaports, of course, overwhelmed, and we're seeing that reflected in today's data. Deere shares climbing the most intraday in 8 months after the maker of farm equipment struck a tentative deal with the UAW. And according to data compiled by Bloomberg, more than 80% of the S&P 500 companies reporting third quarter results have beaten Wall Street estimates. Right now, the S&P 500 lower, down 4 points at 4,600 even. Nasdaq Composite Index 24 points higher at 15,523. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is 18 points higher at 35,837. And we check the markets for you every 15 minutes during the trading day right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg opinion, informed perspectives, and expert data-driven commentary on breaking news.
All right, I'm going to bring in John Authers here. He's in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. John Authers, senior editor, Bloomberg Markets, Bloomberg opinion columnist. He does it all for us. Let's talk inflation. John, you have a column out. Inflation Unraveling gives the Fed a Nixon moment.
Yes.
Give us, all right, just give us the 30,000-foot view, and then you can dig down into the PhD level stuff
Okay,
later.
right. The Nixon moment is a reference to Richard Nixon deciding to leave the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1971, which effectively means that other exchange rates are no longer fixed to the dollar, and the dollar is no longer fixed to gold.
That being key.
Yes.
Off the gold standard is what, you know,
Yes.
truck driving, gun-toting Americans have been angry about that for decades.
Precisely. It's the moment fiat money started that people who love gold and people who love crypto regard as this great betrayal. Now, there's certainly no way you could say that what has happened so far is equal to that. The point of that comparison is that Nixon doing that was in many ways a recognition of reality at the time, because so many different countries, so many traders were just saying, look, there's no way a dollar is worth this much, and there was pressure from around the world on the exchange rate. At the moment, there is what is very unusual is that virtually everywhere there is pressure on yields, pressure from markets telling central banks, we just don't believe you. Inflation isn't purely transitory. There's something more than that going on. We just don't believe you're going to stay that dovish. What's very unusual is how broad that's been. So you've seen, very successful market attacks in terms of they really have forced a change of direction from the central banks already in the emerging markets, also the smaller developed markets, Canada, Britain, Australia. And you're seeing intense speculative pressure on the ECB and the Fed. And the Fed comes up this week. What exactly it does about this is very difficult to work out. But the market has finally grasped that inflation isn't merely transitory, which is still a long way from saying inflation is going to become any kind of a major serious problem. But it's not something that just goes away. It requires some kind of action to deal with it. Now we're going to have a very, very interesting, intense set to between central banks and markets over exactly what we do about inflation.
So, Rich Miller from Bloomberg News also wrote a story yesterday saying that Powell risks a rerun of the 1960s inflation. So, yeah, just sort of pre and during Nixon, basically.
Yes.
And that could turn into the kind of 70s inflation that's a real problem.
That's true. I mean, people in my position or his position have to be careful about these things. That we're still talking a matter of years before you get there.
By the way, for the kids listening, Nixon was a president of the United States from 69. I think he was elected until
and he resigned in 74. We really won't go into why he resigned. And he and the Bretton Woods moment was 50 years ago, almost exactly. It was August 71. So it's a while ago. I could agree with him that if we're talking about anything as alarming as a repeat of the 70s, then we are in the middle of the 60s now. You need to make a lot of things need to go wrong, and a lot of mistakes need to be made for things to be as bad as they were in the 70s, getting on for 10 years from now. So although I've been very strong in trying to argue, look, this isn't just transitory, there is something here, there is a change to this very deflationary environment that we've lived in for well over a decade. That's still a long way from saying we are bound to go back to the 70s.
No, the thing I found interesting in Rich's story, I know we had you on to talk about yours, but I want to I want your opinion.
I really should have read Rich's story. Yeah, carry on.
He says that the missteps in the 60s paved the way for the wage price spiral the following decade. And now we're starting to see, we don't see a wage price spiral. You wouldn't find an economist who says that right now. But you could possibly see the beginnings of it with big jumps in wages that I've heard described as alarming on Wall Street, or the Deere agreement with unions that we wrote about yesterday, where someone said their price gain was enormous. So you're seeing people start to use these kind of adjectives.
No, I would have been slightly stronger than that. But first of all, just to be clear, wage price spiral, we're certainly not there yet. No. Spiral implies that you've had the price and then the wage and then more price and wage. So we certainly haven't formed a spiral yet. My own favourite analogy for this is I looked up the front page of the Financial Times from the week when, as it turns out, British inflation peaked at 26%. And they only had a one-paragraph story about the National Teachers Union taking a pay increase of 27%,
Wow.
which was described as a victory for the government in its battle with the teachers union.
They held them to 27.
Okay, so so if that's what a wage price spiral is, nobody thinks we're there yet.
Right.
I would actually argue that the evidence that if we were going to have one, what is happening now is exactly what we would expect if there was an incipient wage price spiral. I've been tracking this with my inflation heat map, week on week.
Do we have that on the terminal?
Yes.
Okay. Of course we do.
The various measures that the Atlanta Fed keeps of wage tracking are now at their highest levels in a decade. The employment cost index last Friday came out, and that was the highest since the 80s. Again, we're talking about, this is because we've had decades of very low inflation. But no, we are seeing it happen, and we are seeing just the kind of return to pressure from unions that you'd expect.
John Authers, thanks so much for joining us. John Authers, Senior Editor for Bloomberg Markets, a Bloomberg Opinion columnist. We appreciate your thoughts. Right now, we're going to go over to Scotland. President Biden is addressing the COP26 conference in Glasgow.
The enormous opportunity before us, we will condemn future generations to suffer. This is the decade that will determine the answer, this decade. The science is clear. We only have a brief window left before us to raise our ambitions and to meet the task that's rapidly narrowing. This is a decisive decade in which we have an opportunity to prove ourselves. We can keep the goal of limiting global warming to just 1.5 degrees Celsius within our reach if we come together. If we commit to doing our part of each of our nations with determination and with ambition. That's what COP26 is all about. Glasgow must be the kickoff of a decade of ambition and innovation to preserve our shared future. Climate change is already ravaging the world. We've heard from many speakers. It's not hypothetical. It's not a hypothetical threat. It's destroying people's lives and livelihoods, and doing it every single day. It's costing our nations trillions of dollars. Record heat and drought, fueling more widespread and more intense wildfires in some places and crop failures in others. Record flooding, and what used to be a once-in-a-century storms are now happening every few years. In the past few months, the United States has experienced all of this, and every region of the world can tell similar stories. And in an age where this pandemic has made so painfully clear that no nation can wall itself off from borderless threats, we know that none of us can escape the worst that's yet to come if we fail to seize this moment. But ladies and gentlemen, within the growing catastrophe, I believe there's an incredible opportunity, not just for the United States, but for all of us. We're standing at an inflection point in world history. We have the ability to invest in ourselves and build an equitable, clean energy future, and in the process, create millions of good-paying jobs and opportunities around the world. Cleaner air for our children, more bountiful oceans, healthier forests and ecosystems for our planet. We can create an environment that raises the standard of living around the world. And this is a moral imperative, but it's also an economic imperative. If we fuel greater growth, new jobs, better opportunities for all our people, and as we see current volatility in energy prices, rather than cast it as a reason to back off our clean energy goals, we must view it as a call to action. High energy prices only reinforce the urgent need to diversify sources, double down on clean energy development, and adapt promising new clean energy technologies so we can not only we don't remain overly reliant on one source of power to power our economies and our communities. It's in the self-interest of every single nation. And this is a chance, in my view, to make a generational investment in our economic resilience and on our workers and our communities throughout the world. That's what we're going to do in the United States. My Build Back Better framework will make historic investments in clean energy, the most significant investment to deal with the climate crisis that any advanced nation has made ever. We're going to cut U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by well over a gigaton by 2030, while making it more affordable for consumers to save on their own energy bills, with tax credits for things like installing solar panels, weatherizing their homes. Lowering energy prices will also deliver cleaner air and water for our children, electrifying fleets of school buses, increasing credits for electric vehicles, and addressing legacy pollution. It will incentivize clean energy manufacturing, building the solar panels and the wind turbines that are growing energy markets of the future, which will create good-paying union jobs for American workers, and something that none of us should lose sight of. When I talk to the American people about climate change, I tell them it's about jobs. It's about workers who will lay thousands of miles of transmission lines of clean, modern, resilient power grid. The auto workers who build the next generation of electric vehicles, and electricians who will install a nationwide network of 500,000 vehicle stations to power them throughout my country. The engineers who will design new carbon capture systems, and the construction workers who will make them a reality. The farmers who will not only help fight global hunger, but also use the soil to fight climate change. The communities that revitalize themselves around new industries and opportunities. And because we are taking all these actions, the United States will be able to meet the ambitious target I set in the Leaders Summit in Climate back in April, reducing U.S. emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030. We'll demonstrate to to the world the United States is not only back at the table, but hopefully leading by the power of our example. I know it hasn't been the case, and that's why my administration is working overtime to show that our climate commitment is action, not words. On my very first day in office, I took action to return the United States to the Paris Agreement. Since then, our administration has been hard at work unlocking clean energy breakthroughs to drive down the cost of technologies that will require us to achieve net zero emissions, and working with the private sector on the next generation of technologies that will power a clean economy of the future. Over the next several days, the United States will be announcing new initiatives to demonstrate our commitment to providing innovative solutions across multiple sectors, from agriculture to oil and gas, to combating deforestation, to tackling hard and to abate industry. We're planning for both short-term sprint to 2030 that will keep 1.5 degrees Celsius in reach, and for a marathon that will take us to the finish line and transform the largest economy in the world into a thriving, innovative, equitable, and just clean energy engine of net zero for a net zero world. That's why today I'm releasing the U.S. long-term strategy, which presents a vision of achieving the United States goal of net zero emissions economy-wide by no later than 2050, and reinforces an absolutely critical nature of taking bold action in the decisive decade. We're also going to try to do our part when it comes to helping the rest of the world take action as well. We want to do more to help countries around the world, especially developing countries, accelerate their clean energy transition, address pollution, and ensure the world we all must share a cleaner, safer, healthiest planet. We have an obligation to help. At the United Nations in September, I announced that my administration is working with the Congress to quadruple our climate finance support for developing countries by 2024, including significant increase in support for adaptation efforts. This commitment is made possible to each of our collective goals of mobilizing $100 billion annually for climate finance, but mobilizing finance at the scale necessary to meet the incredible need is an all-hands-on-deck effort. As other speakers today have mentioned, governments in the private sector and multilateral development banks must also do their work to go from millions to billions to trillions, the necessary effect of this transition. Today, I'm also submitting a new adaptation communication laying out how we'll implement the global goal of adaptation, as well as announcing our first ever contribution to the Adaptation Fund. But our commitment is about more than just financing. That's a critical piece of it. But we're also going to support solutions across the board. In the lead up to this gathering, the United States joined our G7 partners to launch a Build Back Better World initiative. We also reconvened the Major Economies Forum on Energy and Climate to launch transformative actions and to raise ambition. And together with the European Union, we're launching a global methane pledge to collectively reduce methane emissions, one of the most potent greenhouse gases, by at least 30% by the end of the decade. More than 70 countries have already signed up to support rapid reduction of methane pollution, and I encourage every nation to sign on. It's the simple, most effective strategy we have to slow global warming in the near term. My friends, if we're to recognize that a better, more hopeful future of every nation has to do its part with ambitious targets to keep 1.5 degrees in reach and specific plans on how to get there, especially the major economies. It's imperative that we support developing nations so they can be our partners in this effort. Right now, we're still falling short. There's no more time to hang back or sit on the fence or argue amongst ourselves. This is the challenge of our collective lifetimes, the existential threat to human existence as we know it. And every day we delay, the cost of inaction increases. So let this be the moment that we answer history's call here in Glasgow. Let this be the start of a decade of transformative action that preserves our planet and raises the quality of life for people everywhere. We can do this. We just have to make a choice to do it. So let's get to work, and thank you. Those of us who are responsible for much of the deforestation and all the problems we have so far have an overwhelming obligation to the nations who, in fact, were not there, have not done it. And we have to help much more than we have thus far. God bless you all, and may God save the planet. Thank you.
That was President Biden speaking at the COP26 conference in Glasgow, Scotland, discussing how the United States plans to address climate change. And you wonder, Matt, how effective or what can really come out of this conference?
That didn't come out of Rome last week. I mean, what's the point of all these guys?
China and Russia not there is my point. I mean,
true,
that's
but they weren't at Rome.
Exactly.
The thing is, everybody packs up a motorcade, drives to the airport outside of Rome, loads up those cars on military transport aircraft, flies them to Edinburgh, gets out, gets in the car, drives up to Glasgow. And what's the point? I mean, they already know that they're not going to stop burning coal. They just come up with these tiny little gestures that aren't really going to move the needle. And I wonder if that's all they're going to do. Couldn't they do it in Rome?
Yeah, but this is an event that's been planned for a long time, and it's the fact that they can all get together at least in person has some value.
But they were together. They could just invite the other six to Rome.
Exactly. I know. And Rome's nice this time of year. But so I love Glasgow, love Edinburgh, but you just hope that everybody's together. Maybe you can get some people in some back rooms to cut some deals here, to get some commonality, because something has to be done. But you're just not sure if it's these big events here like this, or is it just China, the U.S., India, some other economies just sitting down and really cutting some meaningful agreements? How does this all really?
I mean, and it's so difficult, frankly, to do. I'm not, I'm not saying that there's an easy solution. In India, where they burn an absolute ton of coal. I mean, we do here too, and the Chinese do also, and Germany does as well. The problem is, what can you do if you want to stop that? Are they gonna? It takes a while to put up nuclear reactors. It's just not going to happen overnight.
No,
but I also don't think it needs to wait until 2038, which is what Germany wants to do, until you agree to stop burning coal.
Yeah, it's interesting, and this energy shortage, quote unquote, that we've been experiencing, certain parts of the globe that have been experienced, kind of highlight the challenges of making that transition. All right now, let's head down to Washington D.C. Let's get world and national news with Amy Marcy.
All right, thank you, guys. President Biden in Glasgow, Scotland, attending the COP26 conference. As we just heard, he says climate change is costing nations trillions of dollars, but still is optimistic the world can take action.
If we fuel greater growth, new jobs, better opportunities for all our people, and as we see current volatility in energy prices, rather than cast it as a reason to back off our clean energy goals, we must view it as a call to action.
President Biden says that when he talks about climate change, he also likes to emphasize job opportunities. Voters will be deciding two governors' races tomorrow. New Jersey's Democratic Governor Phil Murphy facing a challenge by Republican Jack Ciattarelli. And in Virginia, polls show former Democratic Governor Terry McAuliffe and GOP candidate Glenn Youngkin running just dead even. All eyes on Virginia, seen as a bellwether for the midterm elections. A CDC panel set to meet tomorrow. They'll be taking up the issue of Pfizer's COVID-19 shots for kids. The FDA already signed off on the vaccine for children between the ages of 5 and 11. About 28 million children stand to become eligible once these shots are approved. The FDA also delaying its study of Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine for teenagers. Moderna says the FDA indicated it'll take at least until January to complete its review of Moderna's approval request for kids ages 12 to 17. And the coronavirus has killed more than 5 million people around the world. Johns Hopkins University data confirming that figure today, although medical experts say because of underreporting, the real number is likely higher. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
The world's financial decision makers connect on the Bloomberg terminal, sharing ideas, negotiating trades, and forming an influential network that helps power global markets. Isn't it time you join them? Bloomberg.com/professional.
Why get your financial news of Asia from some second-hand source?
The Asian trading day gets underway.
Business news of Asia, firsthand, direct to you.
The regulatory crackdown has been a very big issue in China here of late.
We do have energy stocks leading the Nikkei higher.
Bloomberg Daybreak Asia, tonight at 6 Eastern.
China has vowed to consolidate the country's EV industry.
On Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
My Shiro doesn't always wear a cape, but she always has time for a hug, a smile, for going the extra mile. My Shiro stretches every dollar, puts in long hours, puts others first. But now it's your time, Mom. When you're ready to retire, we want you to be able to enjoy it. Get free tips to help boost your retirement savings now at aceyourretirement.org.
A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
The world's financial decision makers connect on the Bloomberg terminal. The buy side and the sell side together, collaborating across markets and countries in real time, sharing ideas, negotiating trades, and forming an influential network of over 325,000 financial professionals that helps power global markets. Isn't it time you join them? Request a demo at bloomberg.com/professional.
Wake up and text. Text and eat. Text and meet up with a friend you haven't seen in forever.
Hi.
Text and complain that they're on their phone the whole time. Text and listen to them complain that you're on your phone the whole time. Text and whatever. But when you get behind the wheel, give your phone to a passenger. Put it in the glove box. Just don't text and drive. Visit StopTextsStopWrecks.org. A message from NHTSA and the Ad Council.
When was the moment you discovered that you were meant for the business world?
Have you been getting a lot of inquiries from employers?
And then you started looking for the best sources of information.
Technology is challenging the regulators.
Doctors use kind of a virtual reality look.
I feel like the world is courting Elon Musk.
Which is how you got here.
How are other bankers restricted now?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. When will you be able to go to a meeting where nobody smells like hand sanitizer? Who knows? But we can give you the latest business and financial news, fragrance-free.
Let's tease out some of what you just said.
Are the tools in the toolbox for the Fed? Does that point to the need for continued monetary support?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
Did you realize the market this is having on a younger generation?
Bloomberg is listening.
1 in 3 adults has prediabetes. 1 in 3. That means it could be you, your football buddy, your football buddy, or you, your best man, your worst man, you, your dog walker, your cat jogger. While 1 in 3 adults has prediabetes, with early diagnosis, prediabetes can be reversed. Take the risk test at doihaveprediabetes.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and its Prediabetes Awareness Partners.
He was the heart of your family, and he taught you our history. He helped you fix your first flat. He was the best backyard DJ around. And every time he'd tell a story, he'd own the room. But now more than ever, he may feel alone. Today, older adults and their loved ones are struggling to connect, in a time when connection has never been more important. But there is something we can do. Embrace our older loved ones through StoryCorps Connect. With StoryCorps Connect, you can honor seniors remotely with an interview about their life. Every interview will be archived at the Library of Congress, becoming part of American history, so that years from now, future generations can listen in.
All right, Grandpa, what's one piece of advice you have for me?
Just 3 words, sweetheart. Live with courage. The man that had the best stories still has plenty of stories to tell. So connect virtually and share the conversation of a lifetime at StoryCorpsConnect.org/AARP. Connect, honor, share. StoryCorps Connect. A message from AARP, StoryCorps, and the Ad Council.
Introducing Bloomberg Quick Take. Our global stories take on tomorrow today. Watch live news on the events changing your business and your world. And go deeper with original shows on business, technology, politics, and culture. Don't settle for a news network built for yesterday. For a global view and an informed take, Bloomberg Quick Take. Now streaming free on Bloomberg.com/QuickTake. Brought to you by Accenture, American Express, and AT&T Business.
How are
are financial services firms managing in this new reality? Claire Santaniello, Managing Director at BNY Mellon's Pershing, explains.
If the current times have taught us anything, it's the critical role that technology plays in client relationships. Global conditions have created a business imperative for firms to digitally transform the way they meet client needs and the way they work. Pershing's industry-leading technology enables you to adapt to the evolving ways your clients want to do business, now and in the future. It can help you build an even stronger digital client experience in a simpler, smarter, and safer environment. We have worked with clients of every size to transform their business. Pershing gives you the foundation to stand on, plus our unique perspective, to help you run your business even during the most uncertain of times. We help you consider everything.
To learn more about how Pershing can help you transform your business, visit Pershing.com. Pershing LLC, member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Stocks a little wobbly late morning trading. Still hovering around record highs that were set last week. The S&P 500 right now down just 2 points. The Dow Jones Industrial Average after topping 36,000 at one point this morning. Right now up 28 points at 35,848. The Nasdaq Composite Index is 40 points higher. That's up 0.25%. We're at 15,538. Now, smaller company stocks far outpacing the broader market. This is a sign investors confident about economic growth in the U.S. The Russell 2000 was above 1%. And then you have crude oil. It is higher right now. NYMEX crude up 55 cents, 84.11 a barrel. Energy stocks, as a result, making solid gains. ExxonMobil rising over 1%. A mix of companies that rely on direct consumer spending for goods and services also rising. And then you have bond yields. They are higher. That's helping banks make some gains today. And once again, the Dow up 32 points. S&P 500 down 2 points. 10-year yield 158. That is up about 3 basis points right now. We check the markets for you every 15 minutes during the trading day right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Matt.
All right, John, thanks so much. We appreciate that. John Tucker with our Bloomberg Business Flash. We've got most of the world's leaders in Glasgow, Scotland for the COP26 conference. What can we really expect to come out of this get-together? As Matt has been pointing out, they were just in Rome, I guess, a few days ago. Couldn't they have gotten some stuff done there? Jess Shankelman, energy and environment reporter for Bloomberg News, joins us. I believe Jess is in Glasgow. Maybe I'm overselling it, but I believe she's in Glasgow. Jess, give us a sense. You're on the ground there. What are expectations like? Do people believe that something meaningful can be done here?
Hi, yes, I'm in Glasgow. I'm standing in the media centre overlooking the River Clyde, which was a century ago central to the Industrial Revolution. And now people are trying to kind of usher in a new green industrial revolution. They're trying to find a way to prevent catastrophic climate change. We've got a lot of world leaders talking here today. President Joe Biden has just spoken. His speech was slightly underwhelming. There wasn't any new statements. Lots of them have already been made in the run-up to COP. He did say that of the $11.4 billion that he wants to spend on climate finance, helping poor countries tackle climate change, he wants $3 billion of that to go to adaptation. That means helping them to deal with disasters, flooding, all that kind of stuff, not just spending it on solar panels and wind turbines. That's the mitigation side of it. In terms of expectations, it is a negotiation. So, even in Paris 5 years ago, we look back on it now and think, oh, well, that was a success. But at the time, nobody knew. And, in the first week, it really felt like it was a bit of a dance with and nothing was going to happen. And then at the last minute, leaders committed to trying to reduce temperature, keep global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So there is a sense that there could be something positive coming out of the negotiations. However, in terms of the leader summit that's happening now, so far, the waffleometer is fairly high. We've heard a lot of kind of commitments to tackle climate change, not much action.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like they can't come to any meaningful agreement on burning coal, and
India, for example, is burning twice as much coal or more than the U.S. and Europe put together. China obviously isn't even there, and they're burning a ton of coal. We do it here. The Germans love their lignite coal. We've seen prices, I think, triple or even quadruple for coal year to date, with natural gas prices kind of keeping pace with natural gas prices. So we're all willing to pay a ton for the dirtiest stuff and use as much of it as we can. Does it really matter if we set random, almost arbitrary goals for reducing the temperature in 50 years or in 100 years?
Yeah, I mean, the US is not ready to get off domestic coal. In the UK, which where I'm based, they have set a target they're going to close down the last coal-fired power station in the next 2 years. So there are countries in Europe that are getting off coal, but absolutely China, India, the US is not ready to do that. So we've been debating whether...
Or Germany, which is one of the biggest polluters in the world and has said they'll stop with coal in 2038.
So Germany has brought forward its target to 2030 under the new coalition government. So there is some movement there. But yes, absolutely. Germany has big problems because it doesn't want nuclear energy, and if you don't want nuclear energy, it's very difficult to get off coal. So in terms of the G20 agreement, it wasn't as good as it could have been. They did, however, agree to stop financing coal projects overseas. An analyst, environmentalist I spoke to, said, okay, that's not going to sign coal history, which is what the COP president Alex Sharma wants, but it is the beginning of the end for coal, because what they're recognizing is that coal is not economic anymore. So if they're not going to fund it outside of their own countries, when are they going to stop funding it domestically? We're absolutely not there yet, but it was a start.
Jess, give us the sense, you're in Glasgow right now in the media center. How important is it that China is not there, that Russia is not there?
It's pretty important. I mean, world leaders cannot speak if they're not here, so we're expecting a written statement from China's President Xi Jinping, and I'm not sure what we're getting from Putin. So, the whole point of this 2-day leader summit at the start of the COP is to inject political momentum into the talks and to say to the negotiators and to say to the energy ministers, go and do your thing, we want to save the planet. And to not have China turning up, even if it's because of the pandemic, Xi Jinping hasn't left the country for almost 2 years, it doesn't send a good sign that he's not here.
It's not a great start, but of course he's been, as you point out, Jess, he's been sort of landlocked for a while in China. What about what is the chance that Johnson, as you say, Britain's kind of ahead of the pack here in terms of phasing out coal? What's the chance that Boris Johnson can convince the other world leaders to sort of take a leap of faith and join him to some extent?
I mean, they've got where they got to, in terms of the G20, they got where they got to on coal. We know that they got an agreement on ending overseas coal, which, ending it finance overseas, but not at home. We're expecting on, I've lost track of the days now, I think it's Thursday, day 5 of COP, some kind of announcement, potentially with South Africa, which is really heavily reliant on coal, perhaps looking at ways of using development banks to pay countries to shut down coal plants, not just build new green wind turbines and solar panels.
Jess, thanks so much for joining us. Jess Shankelman there, covering Glasgow from the ground. Actually in Glasgow, this is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg. The world's financial decision makers connect on the Bloomberg terminal, sharing ideas, negotiating trades, and forming an influential network that helps power global markets. Isn't it time you join them? Bloomberg.com/professional.
Money Minute. Coca-Cola is buying full control of Body Armor. Coke will buy the company for $5.6 billion. Coke had already owned 30% of the sports drink brand. Apple reportedly wants iPhones to detect car crashes and automatically call 911. According to the Wall Street Journal, next year Apple will come out with a product feature called crash detection for iPhones and Apple Watches. It uses sensors built into Apple devices. The razor-thin staffing that contributed to thousands of canceled passenger flights in October doesn't bode well for a smooth holiday travel season. American Airlines scrapping about 1,500 flights on Saturday and Sunday. Airlines have been caught off guard by the rebound in passengers. Investors are focusing on the Federal Reserve's Wednesday policy decision, the October jobs report out this Friday. Stocks have pulled back from earlier highs, with the S&P right now little changed this session. Courtney Donahoe, Bloomberg Radio.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the lingo.
GOAT, G-O-A-T, acronym, stands for Greatest of All Time. As in, spaghetti sandwiches for dinner? They're my fave. Dad, you're the GOAT.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Where are today's real testing grounds for the latest innovation? Places where advancements in health, transportation, and business happen every day. Cities. Today, cities lead the way, taking local solves and turning them into global solutions. Now, introducing Bloomberg City Lab, a new platform covering the present and future of global cities. Learn more at Bloomberg.com/CityLab. Brought to you in partnership with Hyundai.
We used to take our freedom of movement for granted. Not anymore.
It's not just the people who work for the airline.
And it's natural to feel grateful for the things that kept you going.
Does America have a chance to lose our advantage?
Can we get to herd immunity fast enough so that we'll be in good shape?
Oxford University is starting a study on patients who've recovered from COVID.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Hey, Mama, how you feeling?
Great, and I'm ready for you today.
I'm checking in on you. Morning meditation. Check. Dressed and ready to work out.
Check.
Check your blood pressure yet.
And check.
Boom! Great job, Mom. And about those gold earrings.
No, ma'am.
Now more than ever, it's important that we protect our hearts and the hearts of those we love. Monitor your blood pressure daily and help each other stay motivated. Rally your squad to take the online pledge at releasethepressure.org. Brought to you by the Release the Pressure Coalition and the Ad Council.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry powered by complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their business strategically. Yet, the most competitive managers in the market know, with the right partner and a flexible operating platform, you can go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
Determination and operational strength are both essential factors for growth in asset management. I'm Steve Meyer, President and Head of SEI's Investment Manager Services Division. We know that disruptive forces create opportunities around the world. If you see potential in change, our industry specialists will maximize SEI's integrated platform of data and risk management, global investment operations, compliance support, and investor services to position your asset management business for success. Come grow with us.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize-change.
As a research university, NJIT makes smart technologies even smarter. That's why NJIT graduate and civil engineer Anya O'Dwyer says the university is so important for her industry.
Construction and civil engineering is always going to have cranes and, people and movement, but how we're designing and implementing things, that's what's changing. We have millions of data points now that we never had before, and that's allowed us to think about planning and design in a way that we haven't done so before. NJIT is very much at the forefront of that. Collecting data, understanding data, manipulating data, having access to a facility like NJIT, which is constantly focused on research and innovation, is so important for the industry and what it means to be designing for smarter systems.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Hi everyone, Al Roker here. As a guy with his own catchphrase, I appreciate that Smokey's only said, only you can prevent wildfires. But I'm filling in because there's a lot more to report. Like when there are parched or windy conditions out there, you gotta be extra careful with things like burning yard waste. After all, wildfires can start anywhere, even in your neck of the woods. Go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
When unprecedented events are unfolding, it's important to let history teach us.
Do you think it's a different world for the Fed?
Bloomberg Balance of Power with David Weston. Weekdays at noon Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Markets.
All right, coming up in this half hour, while President Biden continues his European travels, lots of work being done in Washington, D.C. on his spending plan as well as the fiscal stimulus. We'll get the latest on that. Plus, we're going to check in on the crypto ETF space. We're going to do that with Ben Slavin. He's a global head of ETFs at BNY Mellon. But first, let's go to John Tucker and get a Bloomberg Business Flash. John.
And Paul, stocks kind of fluctuating. Traders assessing corporate earnings and also the economic data we got this morning. And don't forget the Federal Reserve getting ready to wind down stimulus. They have a policy meeting this week. Equity gains kind of petered out after this report that showed persistent supply chain challenges continue to weigh on manufacturers. Meantime, for the earnings season, really gearing up. We're in the thick of it right now. More than 80% of S&P 500 companies reporting third quarter results. They've beaten Wall Street estimates. That's according to data compiled by Bloomberg. Troy Gajewski of FS Investments says as long as there is liquidity out there, stocks can go even higher.
M2 is still growing faster than nominal GDP. And given the seasonality right now, we do expect the green light to stay go. But as we get into next year, that light's starting to flash yellow, right?
We're looking at some individual shares. Let's start with the McDonald's, the world's biggest restaurant chain. Those shares are higher, hitting a record right now at $250.14 a share. And then you have Moderna, that's sliding after its COVID-19 shot failed to win U.S. regulatory authorization for teenagers. Right now, the Dow Jones Industrial Average up 62 points, a rise of 0.2%. We're at 35,882. The S&P 500 is 2 points higher at 4607. The Nasdaq Composite Index 53 points higher. That's up about 0.4% at 15,552. NYMEX crude West Texas is up 65 cents. We're at 84.22 a barrel. And the 10-year yield 3 basis points higher at 158. We check the markets for you every 15 minutes during the trading day right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Matt and Paul.
Thanks very much, John Tucker there with your Bloomberg Business Flash. Now I want to get back to politics, but bring it from Glasgow to Washington in a sense and talk about the, what did they call it? It was a framework.
A framework, yes.
Framework. Yes. President Biden's framework, $1.75 trillion framework, although over 10 years, is starting to gather some steam. Congressional tax reporter Laura Davidson joins us out of D.C. to talk about when we can expect a vote. I guess that's what everyone wants to know. When is this thing actually going to happen, Laura?
That's a real good question. House leaders were hoping that they could do something as soon as this week. That's a super ambitious timeline. Over the weekend, they were thinking they might be able to vote on Tuesday, tomorrow. The bill is not yet written. There's still not agreement on some of the big pieces like drug pricing, as well as some of the other pay floors. So it's really unclear when there's going to be a vote. There also are a lot of political considerations here. You need to have both the moderates and progressives on board with the entire bill, and this is something that really could be weeks, if not months away.
Unbelievable. So, Laura, I mean, what's the sense here? You think about a $1.75 trillion. That's not a lot to the Matt Millers of the world, but that's a big number to me. However, it's well down from what the Biden administration initially asked. What's the
and what we need in terms of America to invest in infrastructure?
I'm not sure what the right number is, but it's certainly below what I think the administration really wanted. Does this suggest that the administration will kind of take whatever deal they can get at this point?
Yeah, and this is really the political reality of only having, a 3-4 seat majority in the House, as well as, basically having no room for error in the Senate, is they, couldn't get all the things that the administration wanted. When we look at the plans that Biden put out in the spring, that was something like maybe infrastructure bill, that's kind of the branding. You hear Democrats say a lot of things, that housing is infrastructure or childcare is infrastructure. The idea that these things are all, key tenets that support the economy. But the definition of infrastructure has been sort of a running joke in Washington this year. That it's really not been, kind of what has traditionally been thought about as infrastructure, but really expanded to include a lot of things, that do have a, kind of infrastructure component, things like renewable energy and, job training, that sort of thing, as well as, kind of a whole host of Democratic priorities.
So, I'm not really sure who I need to be focusing on, Laura, over this next week or several weeks about, who's going to really get this thing done. I'm not sure it's the president. Is it Pelosi? Is it Manchin? Who do I need to be focusing on here?
So there's a couple of key players here, and these are really the parties that are not yet satisfied with the bill. One, that's Sinema and Manchin. They have not come out. They came out and sort of expressed general, warmness that there was, progress and that a deal was being made, but they didn't actually endorse that framework that the president put out last week. So those are two parties to watch here. What do they need to get fully on board? The other person here on the other side of the spectrum is Senator Bernie Sanders, and he wants to make sure there's something done on drug pricing. That was not in the bill. There were lots of negotiations over the weekend to try to come up with some sort of deal to lower the cost of prescription drugs. We'll see if that can make it in. The other big thing, and this is, sort of on a whole different playing field, but it's the state and local tax deduction. A lot of members, particularly in the House, representing areas, New York, New Jersey, want to make sure that an expansion of that tax credit, that tax deduction is in there. It wasn't in the framework, but House leaders have pledged they'll get it in, and they pretty much have to if they want to get that bill out of the chamber.
And this has to be, again, something that they can agree on in a bipartisan way. Surely Republicans want that tax deduction to be expanded as well.
So this bill actually doesn't have to be bipartisan at all. Democrats are pushing it through in a way that they only need Democratic votes, but they basically need every Democrat to vote yes for it. The infrastructure bill, the kind of the roads and bridges bill, that was a bipartisan effort. But the social infrastructure bill, this is just a partisan Democrat-only approach. So you actually, so you have it's really easy for Republicans right now because they're in the opposition, they're in the minority. They can just criticize the bill. They don't actually have to vote for anything.
All right, Laura, thank you so much for joining us. We always appreciate getting your updates. Laura Davison, congressional tax reporter for Bloomberg News. Right now, let's head back down to Washington, D.C., World and National News with Amy Mars. Amy.
All right, thank you, Paul. President Biden in Glasgow, Scotland, attending the COP26 conference. He did address the conference, saying that the time to act is now.
We meet with the eyes of history upon us, and the profound questions before us. It's simple. Will we act? Will we do what is necessary? Will we seize the enormous opportunity before us?
He says the U.S. will demonstrate that they haven't merely returned to the table. The U.S. plans to lead by example. U.S. Supreme Court justices grappling with the power of federal judges to block Texas' ban on abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy. Now they're weighing whether abortion providers in the Justice Department can stop the law despite an unusual provision that Texas included, trying to insulate the measure from judicial review. Mark Herron is a lawyer with the Center for Reproductive Rights.
The combined effect is to transform the state courts from a forum for the protection of rights into a mechanism for nullifying them.
Now, Chief Justice John Roberts questioned Herron about whether the Constitution lets federal courts consider the provider's bid to sue the state judges, who would then handle any lawsuits. SpaceX and NASA trying again this week to send a crew to the International Space Station aboard a Dragon space capsule. That launch was delayed over the weekend because of weather. The mission on Wednesday will be carrying 3 NASA astronauts and a German astronaut to the International Space Station. We're, of course, watching that for you. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. Much more still to come on this Monday morning edition of Bloomberg Markets. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
The world's financial decision makers connect on the Bloomberg terminal. The buy side and the sell side. Across markets and sharing ideas, negotiating trades, and forming an influential network of over 325,000 financial professionals that helps power global markets. Isn't it time you join them? Request a demo at Bloomberg.com/professional.
Wake up and text.
Text and eat. Text and catch the bus. Text and miss your stop. Wait. Text and be late to work.
Sorry, I'm late.
Text and work. Text and pretend to work. Text and act surprised when someone calls you out for not working.
Who, me?
Text and meet up with a friend you haven't seen in forever.
Hi. Oh, hey.
Text and complain that they're on their phone the whole time. Text and listen to them complain that you're on your phone the whole time. Text and whatever. But when you get behind the wheel, give your phone to a passenger. Put it in the glove box. Just don't text and drive. Visit StopTextsStopWrecks.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Burden LLP Accountants and Advisors presents Tax Chat with Richard Goldstein, Senior Principal and Co-Leader of Burden State and Local Tax Practice.
COVID-19 pandemic state and local government restrictions have caused many people to shelter in place outside their primary state of residence. The new normal of remote working has proliferated potentially costly state and local tax residency issues. For example, if you live in Manhattan but have been residing and working in Connecticut because of the pandemic, you may be a resident of one or both states and potentially taxed twice on the same income. At Burden, we help clients develop a plan to address double residency concerns and non-resident income allocation to minimize their overall tax liability. If you're a high net worth individual or a business owner, let Burden help protect you, your family, and your business.
For more Tax Chat from Burden Accountants and Advisors, visit burdenllp.com. That's BERDONLLP.com. Burden Accountants and Advisors. We listen, we solve, we do.
Economics.
Chairman Powell looks brilliant.
Finance.
Some breaking news for you. A share sale.
Investment.
The narrative of the reopening trade has changed.
The Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast.
Do you want some volatility, Tom? Please, do you want me to go there?
Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrow, Lisa Abramowitz, and the names that shape the world's markets.
Joseph Stiglitz of Columbia University, the laureate.
Bloomberg Surveillance. Listen today at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts.
Accounting professional Liam Cohen, CPA, a trustee of the Jewish Communal Fund, and Sephardic Beaker Holland, talks about why he uses JCF's donor-advised fund and recommends JCF to his clients.
JCF is an organization that I've worked with for many years, both personally and in my accounting practice. The ease of giving and managing my donations through their website is very effective. Using it for tax planning and managing all of my charitable giving through one place. JCF's endowment helps support Jewish organizations throughout the tri-state area, and that's very important to me and my clients.
JCF's donor-advised fund is the smarter way to give back. Let Jewish Communal Fund maximize your clients' charitable deductions and streamline their charitable giving. Since JCF handles all the administration, get started now at jcfny.org or call 212-752-8277. We have a gift for giving.
And what you doing with your phone? Taking pictures?
No, I'm asking questions.
Like what?
Hey, Bobo, do flowers have best friends?
I'm sorry. I'm afraid I don't know that. Hey, follow me. I want to show you something. Look, flowers do have best friends.
Whoa.
Some answers can only be found in nature. Discover the unsearchable. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a trail near you. Brought to you by the United States Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of prime services, shares how we help you consider everything.
In today's ever-evolving environment, the team at Pershing's Prime Services wants to know, what are you focused on now? Are you confident in the stability of your counterparty? Do you feel they can help you grow your business? When it comes to fundraising, do you have access to the mindset of the advisor or have what you need to navigate the ODD process? Exceptional service for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. Whether it's customized financing or securities lending solutions, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your demands, so you can focus on growing your business and producing results for your clients.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing LLC, member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
What is dedication?
The thing that drives me every day
whether it's attention, affection, knowledge, and there's this huge responsibility in making sure that when he's no longer under my wing, that he's a good person. I think the advice I would give is you don't need to know all the answers. The craziest thing was believing that your dad knew everything. So as a dad, you felt like you had to know everything. You had to get everything right. It's okay to make mistakes. As long as it's coming from love, then, you know, it kind of starts to work itself out. I want him to be able to sit back on me and know we work together, we did a good job.
That's dedication. Find out more at fatherhood.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Methane. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash. And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. After the record close for the major averages on Friday, they've turned mixed now. The Institute for Supply Management's gauge and factory activity falling to 60.8 from 61.1. Supply chain challenges continue to weigh on manufacturers. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen dismissing recent moves in the bond market that have signaled concern. She's expressing confidence in the continuing recovery, telling Bloomberg, I think what we're going to see is good, solid recovery. As far as the earnings scorecard, more than 80% of the S&P 500 companies reporting third quarter results have beaten Wall Street estimates. Right now, the S&P 500 up just a point. We're at 46.06. The Dow Jones Industrial Average 47 points, 0.1%, at 35,864. The Nasdaq Composite Index is up 57 points. That's a 0.4% at 15,555. 10-year yield 158, 3 basis points higher. That's helping financials. And also the oil companies getting a boost from the price of crude. NYMEX crude is up 56 cents a barrel.
Investors are not only preferring this access to crypto, but certainly doing so in the ETF structure, as witnessed by the trading volume and the demand we've seen for the products.
So, Ben, give us a sense of how the Grayscale, as it converts from a trust to an ETF, how that will differ from the ProShares Bitcoin ETF.
Well, they're two very different things. So, Grayscale obviously has been around for a while, and they announced their intent to convert to an ETF. And Grayscale's Bitcoin Trust holds the underlying Bitcoin. But in the case of the ProShares product and the other futures-based products, we saw another one launched by a firm called Valkyrie, and there are more behind it, are investing in futures. And there are some very important differences that investors need to be aware of in terms of how they work and the risks and the returns they will receive. But most importantly, the futures ETFs don't hold Bitcoin. They hold a future. And there are costs to roll that futures contract, especially when, like we have now, the futures curve slopes upward, and there's a cost. So there will be some differences in how those products track, compared to a physical product.
That's like USO, right?
Correct. The Bitcoin products will work very similar to the other products that investors and ETF investors know, like USO or UNG, that are doing the same, but they're holding oil and gas in those cases.
And the problem is you can, the underlying asset, you can invest in both, and the convergence can be huge, like 10, 20% after even a year, right?
Correct. And that is something that's hard to predict, driven by markets, and it will directly depend on the slope of the futures curve. So it is a variable that investors need to be aware of, and certainly we've seen that in other markets where similar things have happened.
Ben, do you think the regulators will get to the point where there can be a straight-up ETF with the underlying coin as opposed to the futures?
Well, I mean, certainly the SEC allowed the ProShares product to launch, and they got comfortable really for a couple reasons. One was the 1940 Act regulatory scheme, which is common to most mutual funds. And second, they were able to get comfortable with exchange-listed futures because they're regulated. And also it means that the ETF itself doesn't hold the underlying Bitcoin. So certainly there's going to be some work to be done to be able to get the SEC comfortable to allow ETFs to hold the Bitcoin directly. So we're going to look for that evolution to occur to make sure those investor protections are in place. Again, before the SEC would get comfortable with those approvals.
By the way, what was the pandemic like for ETF investing, for the world of ETFs? Before the pandemic, I would sometimes go to these conferences for big ETF providers like Vanguard, for example, and notice that the growth was just amazing. And because the kids, right, invest a lot of times through BTFs, they prefer passive, which is why I think of Vanguard, investing, or they can do kind of active investing with different ETFs. Did growth continue like that throughout the pandemic?
We've seen phenomenal growth, in fact, record-setting growth for the industry, as well as on our platform at BNY. So right now, we just hit $1 trillion in inflows into ETFs globally, a little more than $700 billion of that coming in the U.S., which is shattering the all-time records. We saw a record-setting 2020, and again, we're seeing that here in 21. So the flow has been incredible. But we're also seeing a trend with new product development slowly shift away from passive towards actively managed strategies. And that is something we're seeing pick up in terms of, those products, accelerating with both the new products that are coming to market as well as the assets. And that's something I expect to continue. But certainly the passive ETFs have a big lead on active, so there's quite a bit of ground for those new products to make up, given where the market's at today.
Hey, Ben, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Ben Slavin, Global Head of ETFs and Asset Servicing at BNY Mellon. I mean, you have, a couple of these, the two fastest growing areas, it seems, of finance, which is one, ETFs, and two, crypto. Makes sense to bring
them together. It's like peanut butter and chocolate, right?
Exactly right. So it'll be interesting to see, how many more come on the heels of the ProShares ETF and then now the Grayscale conversion from a trust into an ETF. How many more will come down the pike?
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to also see how this affects the price of the underlying, right? If more institutional investors, and this is the big bet that a lot of Bitcoin and crypto investors are making, that it'll become more adopted, not only institutionally, but just become a part of people's portfolios.
Looking at Bitcoin here, $61,500, up about 0.9%. Coming up, Bloomberg Markets with David Weston. He will drive the conversation for you. Updates from Glasgow and Washington. This is Bloomberg.
Listen.
If knowledge is power, the Bloomberg Terminal is your power up. Connecting you to real-time financial data, market-moving news, powerful analytics, and an influential network of financial decision-makers around the world. Share ideas, negotiate trades, and gain the insight you need to make more informed decisions. See how the terminal can take your workflow to the next level at Bloomberg.com/professional.
It's an unfolding, ever-changing universe of characters.
Can we get out of the pandemic?
Bloomberg Business Week.
It's the app that made trading hard to resist.
Weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio.
With the Bloomberg Small Business Report, I'm John Tucker, brought to you by Indeed. The Small Business Administration has launched a $100 million program to help underserved communities improve access to financial help, including loans and grants. The Community Navigator pilot program will provide funding to 51 organizations organizations that will work with over 400 local groups and small businesses, including those owned by veterans, women, and those from rural communities and communities of color, get financial assistance and access to capital. The program will also assist with contracting and procurement, marketing, operations, business development, and exporting industry-specific training. This program is part of the Biden administration's American Rescue Plan, which was signed back in March to reduce the financial barriers to entrepreneurs on the road to economic recovery. And that's the Bloomberg Small Business Report. I'm John Tucker.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically. Yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
Determination and operational strength are both essential factors for growth in asset management. I'm Steve Meyer, President, Head of SEI's Investment Manager Services Division. We know that disruptive forces create opportunities around the world. If you see potential in change, our industry specialists will maximize SEI's integrated platform of data and risk management, global investment operations, compliance support, and investor services to position your asset management business for success. Come grow with us.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seizechange.
Markets, you can't predict them.
The Delta variant is ripping up the playbook.
Investors being in a bit of a fog at the moment.
But when you listen to us, you'll come pretty close.
Let's take a look at those small cap stocks.
We're taking a look at some of the sector winners, the sector losers.
Is this bullish or is it bearish?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Broadcasting 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio. From the world of politics.
I do think the announcement of the framework the other day means that we will get both of these bills done.
To the world of business.
We need a world data organization, like a world trade organization, but involving data.
This is Balance of Power with David Weston.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our television and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. If it's Monday, this must be Glasgow, as world leaders have moved on from the G20 summit in Rome to an even bigger summit, the COP26 in Glasgow. To set the stage, we go now to Glasgow and my colleague Francine Lacqua, who is there anchoring Bloomberg coverage. Francine, thank you so much for being with us. Set the stage here. I think that some people were a little disappointed at what G20 came up with in climate. What's expected at COP26?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The G20 in Rome, David, was meant to be preparatory talks almost for then the leaders coming here to Glasgow, Scotland. Now, the focus is on what the G20 didn't achieve. So they could have had a deal on methane to reduce it by 30% between 2020 and 2030. They did not. They had something much more generic. We could have had something on coal saying we have to stop using coal, full stop. Again, we didn't have that. We had something a lot more generic saying we have to stop financing outside coal plants. So after the disappointment of G20, a lot of people here are asking, well, what are we going to achieve at COP26? How is this different? How can we rally and get a lot more done? Now, first of all, I would point to the fact that we heard from the President of the United States, Mr. Biden, saying they are ready, despite challenges to filtering all that money towards renewables, to take center stage again when it comes to climate change. This was an important signal. It doesn't necessarily mean that the money goes to where it needs to be. The focus will be on 200 countries here in COP26, as much of who's here than who's not here. The Chinese president is not here. The Russian president is not here. The Brazilian president is not here, to see whether they can come up with more solutions, but with, again, concrete action, concrete plans, and money pledged, the right, correct amount of money pledged, which they couldn't achieve at the G20 in Rome.
Well, Francine, it does strike me you struck two very critical elements. One is money. Is real money going to show up to help countries make the transition? Yeah. It's a lot of money. There's been commitments, but it hasn't really come through. And the other is coal, which is so critical. Some people were saying going into this, unless they got some firm commitments, date certain to give up coal, they really weren't going to get there. Is there any prospect of that?
Look, it's very difficult. Again, if you look at the G20, remember, this is 80% of global emissions. So if you have the G20, which of course China was not there, but it's part of the G20, not being behind this, it's very difficult to see what can be achieved at COP26 on coal. Again, something that I guess is better than nothing, David, is the fact that they did decide not to finance coal plants outside, but you're still using it domestically. Certainly the big emitters of the world are. So, the difference between G20 and COP26 is they will have more pressure, maybe after the disappointment, and we heard this from Boris Johnson saying, after the disappointment of the G20, let's not do the same at COP26. I'm sure for the next 2 weeks we have 30,000 delegates here, about 200 diplomats negotiating. They'll probably negotiate night and day. I don't know whether they will stick to the targets like the G20 did from the Paris Agreement, or whether they'll go, they'll go a lot further. But you're absolutely right. Coal is the single worst fossil fuel that pollutes. This, again, ties up with the energy crisis, and can we really do this transition so quickly that in the snap of a finger you stop using coal, or whether we need more time? And that's where the tension is between Western democracies and emerging economies.
And Francine, we're so fortunate to have you over there in Glasgow to bring this all to us and put it in perspective. Thanks so much. That's Francine Lacqua of Bloomberg. One of the big issues for world leaders at COP26 is how we're going to pay for all the major actions they're discussing when it comes to climate. To get a sense of the economics of it all, we welcome now Tyler Goodspeed of the Hoover Institution. Dr. Goodspeed served as acting chair of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Trump. So thank you, Tyler, for being back with us. I want to talk about the Fed meeting, also jobs. But before that, since we are on COP26, give us a sense for, as an economist, what we're looking at here. I've seen estimates as high as $150 trillion over 30 years. What would that do to the global economy?
Well, David, it's always great to talk with you. There's a wonderful, I spent a lot of time in Scotland. There's a wonderful word in Scotland to describe the Scottish weather. It's dreek. It's often used in combination with dur. But in terms of the climate issues there, look, I think there's an elephant in the room who is not in the room, and that is Xi Jinping. There can be no solution to climate change that doesn't involve China. At the moment, in recent years, China has been building more coal-powered capacity than exists in the entire grid in the European Union. Look, in terms of costs, I think that there are ways to achieve reductions in greenhouse gas, particulate matter, and CO2 emissions that are done in relatively economically efficient way. And we saw this with the shale revolution here in the United States, where thanks to the shale revolution, we actually observed bigger declines in CO2, GHG, and particulate matter emissions than over the same period in the European Union. We also saw bigger declines than were predicted from the Clean Power Plan by the EPA back in 2012. And because it was done through innovation, namely shale gas displacing dirty coal, because it was through innovation, it actually came at lower cost to consumers, so that disproportionately helps folks who are at the lower end of the income distribution.
So, Tyler, you put your finger on something that's very important, and that is the extent to which we can rely upon the private sector to do something. It doesn't only have to be the government. But should the governments give them a little helping hand? And let's talk about carbon pricing, because some people say one of the things that would be constructive coming out of COP26 would be a carbon price, something like $50 a metric ton, and then let the private sector sort it out.
So I think that there are merits and demerits when it comes to carbon pricing. But certainly I think that it's worth looking at certainly the border adjustment aspect of this, because at the end of the day, as I said, there can be no solution to climate change if China is not a part of that.
I have to ask one other question here from your time during the Trump administration. We now see the aluminum and steel tariffs coming back off, although they're modified, as I understand it, for some green goals in there. What do you think of that? About that? Will that help growth in the United States, taking those tariffs off?
At the end of the day, I don't see the European Union as being our major source of steel. At the margin, I think it could probably, it might temper some of the price pressures that we've been seeing, but the big global producers of steel and aluminum are not in the European Union.
So, Tyler, let's turn to the big order of the day this week in the United States, which is, of course, the Fed meetings starting tomorrow, but we'll get a decision on Wednesday, and then we have jobs numbers coming on Friday. You've expressed some, if I can put the word in your mouth, concern about the extent to which we're having inflation. At the same time, we really have labor shortages. Take us through what the Fed is looking at on its dashboard in those meetings starting tomorrow.
Well, so it's a really unique situation that we're in because on the one hand, we have all these signs of a very tight labor market. When you look at quits rates, when you look at vacancies, it looks and feels like a very tight labor market, and yet it's a tight labor market while we're still 5 million jobs short of where we were in February 2020 and 8 million jobs short of where we would be had jobs growth continued at pre-pandemic pace. So I think that this is sort of a strange situation that we've not been in, to have both a shortfall in employment and all these signs of a tight labor market with a lot of upward wage pressure.
So, Tyler, as you know so well, it's a dual mandate for the Federal Reserve, which is price stability as well as employment. As you look at those two indicators right now, what should that inform the Fed about what they should be doing when it comes to monetary policy, if anything?
Well, unfortunately, I think it puts monetary policy in a bit of a bind because those two aspects of the dual mandate are increasingly in tension with one another. If I were in policy at the moment, I would be focused on the fiscal side at doing everything I could to incentivize increased labor force participation, because it turns out that when we look at labor force participation, we recovered by August 2020. We'd recovered half of the large decline in labor force participation from the early stages of the pandemic. Since August 2020, labor force participation hasn't budged. And when you go around, walk about and ask people on the street, ask firms, ask chief procurement officers, the labor shortage is just manifest, and it's across sectors. And so I think fiscal policy really needs to be focused on getting the supply side of the economy moving.
Well, let's talk about that specifically with the so-called Build Back Better package. Whatever's in it's not clear to me at the moment. But is that an argument, actually, a subtle argument for things like child care? Because it actually might increase your participation.
So with these sorts of things, the devil is in the details. So we actually did a big expansion of the child tax credit back in 2017. We doubled the child tax credit. We expanded eligibility for it, and we made it refundable. But we made it refundable only against earned income. So you had to be working in order to qualify for the child tax credit. The design of the child tax credit in the new Build Back Better program actually eliminates that work requirement, and so it eliminates the subsidy to employment at the lower end of the income distribution. So this is why some estimates actually suggest that if implemented as written, this increase in the child tax credit could actually result in 1 to 1.5 million fewer workers participating in the labor force. One of the other provisions that I think would have been great, potentially, even though the empirical evidence is somewhat mixed, is paid family leave. But it looks like that's not going to make it through to the final bill.
So finally here, Tyler, let me ask you the open-ended question, rather than ask you about whether you're like this or like that. If the priority should be fiscal policy that increases the labor force participation rate, what should that be? What's the number one thing?
I think the number one thing is, first of all, there are a lot of tax provisions on the individual side from the 2017 tax law that are currently scheduled to start sunsetting. I think making a lot of those permanent would help incentivize labor force participation among folks 55 and over, many of whom have left the labor force. But I think it's not just about the labor market, it's also about business investment. So we got, on Friday, we learned that GDP growth in the third quarter was a disappointing 2%. That's actually just on par with potential output, so we're not closing the gap to where we should be. And one of the big drags on GDP growth last quarter was investment in equipment and investment in structures, which were both negative. And so I think making sure that we have the incentives in place to encourage businesses to continue to invest in new plant and equipment per worker is also going to be important for helping the supply side of the U.S. economy recover.
It's always so good to have you with us. Thank you, Tyler. That's Tyler Goodspeed of the Hoover Institution. Coming up, we take a look at the New Jersey gubernatorial election tomorrow with Professor Matthew Hale of Seton Hall University. This is Balance of Power, and we are on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
Carol Massar.
This document. If knowledge is power, the Bloomberg terminal is your power up. Connecting you to real-time financial data, market-moving news, analytics, and an influential network of financial decision makers around the world. To make more informed decisions. See how the terminal can take your workflow to the next level at Bloomberg.com/professional.
It's been on tariffs since early May.
Tim Stenevec. So take us into the economic impact of this.
Along with reporters and editors who help make your business week profitable.
Let's dig into it with Bloomberg Business Week editor Joe Weber.
It's the cover story of the upcoming issue.
Bloomberg Business Week, weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern.
These are retailers that have been on everybody's radar.
Those Apple numbers continuing to come in.
On Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com.
Hi, it's Olivia Munn with my shelter pets, Frankie and Chance. Say hi, guys. When I adopted them, I discovered that they both have incredible personalities. Chance's sole purpose in life is to love and to be loved. Frankie is a little bit of a scoundrel and always entertaining. They're a little bit of a lot of things, but they're all pure love. Adopt pure love at shelterpetproject.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council, the Humane Society of the United States, and Maddie Smith.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is the Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with his Bloomberg Business Flash. This is on a day when stocks are fluctuating. Traders looking at corporate earnings and the economic data. But also there's a Fed policy meeting this week. The Federal Reserve getting ready to wind down its extraordinary stimulus. S&P 500 little change right now. It's up 4 points as commodity and retail shares offset losses in the tech companies. And the Dow trading below right now 36,000. This is the level it touched earlier today. A gauge of small cap stocks climbing about 2%, and you have treasuries falling in price. That is pushing the yields higher right now. More than 80% of S&P 500 companies reporting third quarter results have beaten Wall Street estimates. S&P 500 again 4 points higher. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. New Jersey is holding one of the two governor's races tomorrow, with incumbent Phil Murphy expected to win re-election, although the race may have tightened a little bit in the closing days. To take us through where we are, we welcome now Matthew Hale. He's professor of political science at Seton Hall University. Professor, thanks so much for being with us. Where do you see the race right now? I've seen various polls. Where do you think it's coming out?
So the polls that are out right now have Murphy up between 9 and 11 points. I think it's going to be a little bit closer than that, but I think most people are expecting Murphy to win somewhere around between 5 to 7.
So if you're the governor of New Jersey right now, do you care whether you win or lose? Do you care how much you win by if you're going to win? Does the margin matter to Phil Murphy?
I think it actually does matter, because the closer the margin is, the sooner the race to replace him actually happens. So if he has a big margin, then he's got a lot more time to carry out in the second term. If he squeaks by a win, he's going to be perceived as weak, and that means it's tough for him to do what he wants to do as second-term governor.
So I took a peek a little bit of the work you've done on this, Professor, and it turns out that he had a big margin last time, but it was really 4 counties that really delivered it for him. Tell us about those 4 counties.
Sure. Last time in 2017, he won by about 300,000 votes. But 250,000 of those votes were in 4 counties: Hudson, Essex, Union, and Camden. Those are 4 counties that are majority African-American or majority minority, if you count Latino vote as well. So it's incredibly important to his vote totals that those folks show up, that he actually gets that vote out. Now, remember, those are counties that have very strong political machines. They are counties that both the Democrats and Republicans, but particularly the Democrats, are really adept at turning out their votes. That machine has to turn itself on for Murphy to have a big win. Otherwise, it could be a lot closer than people expect.
Do we have a sense about voter turnout? As I understand it, this is the first time New Jersey is going to have early voting. Is that correct?
Well, we in the last time around, we did have a lot more vote by mail. But yes, this is the first time we're doing early voting. Polls have been open about a week. About 500,000 people have already voted. And so, that does tend to help turnout figures overall. And the more turnout tends to help Phil Murphy. So the fact that we have greater early voting, I think, is probably going to help the Democrats.